The first Constitution was an affirmative action plan. It is an affirmative action plan for whites. You hear white folk always talking about they're against affirmative action plans. They're only against affirmative action plan for you. Why? You see, because I wrote the other affirmative action plan. I wrote it in 1970 when I was overseeing the education system for Florida. I did not write an affirmative action plan for everybody. I wrote that plan for black people. I did not write that plan for minorities and poor folk and people of color, midgets, humpback, lesbians. I wrote it for black folk. Why? Because, see, affirmative action was supposed to be corrective action. Correcting something that the system and that the government has done consciously, historically, and continuously against a very specific group of people. That's what affirmative action is. Then why in the world do you all keep letting people put you in a bag called minority? No government hasn't done anything in the minorities. Why are you letting them put in there, comparing you and equating you to gays? And well, now they're getting all the benefits. And Hispanics weren't even in the country. Now, when you go to the affirmative action plan, guess what? I got Eskimos in the affirmative action plan. When did Eskimos pick cotton? They had nothing in the world to do with affirmative action. The government hasn't done anything to them. And you go into an affirmative action program, the affirmative action program has been totally corrupted. The only people that should have been on the affirmative action plan in the first place were black folk. Because those are the only people that the government done some things to specifically exploit, misuse, abuse, subordinate, enslave, Jim Crow segregate, castrate, lynch, and do it and deny them education. Only black people. And you gotta go look at the affirmative action plan. They got everything in there except your dog from the neighbor's yard. And I don't see any blacks speaking up about it. They'll go right down and call, well, I'm a minority. How the hell you get to be a minority? What's a minority? I don't know what it is, Dr. Ennis, but I know I'm one. Because they call me one. And then leaving that point, I'm telling you, it is illegal and unconstitutional for you to equate anything to black folk in this country and make them equal. There's no constitutional basis to have any Asians, Arabs, Hispanics, women, gays in affirmative action programs or preferential programs. It is illegal. But I haven't seen one black person, not one black person, go to court and raise hell about it. As a matter of fact, I have whites that tell me that they were totally, absolutely surprised that when they started doing that no blacks spoke up and raised Cain about it. They just sat there and let it go down. That's why back in 1970, with the affirmative action plan, when I wrote that plan, they turned around immediately and came up with a thing called Title IX. Because throughout history, every time you tried to do something for black folk, they would throw other groups in there to water it down and dilute it and give it to everybody so blacks wouldn't be anything left for black folk. And they come up with Title IX. How are you going to spend those money now since we dictated for black people and they got Title IX? Every county, all 67 of the letter back says any money comes out here, we're giving it to women. Not a penny would go to black folk. No black folk raised Cain. None of them said anything. They went down like that. That's what happened to your money. Because you see, and guess what it's backed by? It's backed by the United States Supreme Court. One of the most racist organizations in America. One of the most racist institutions in America is the United States Supreme Court. And I still cease with a total, absolute amazement as to why black folk keep going to the court system. It doesn't make any sense. The deck is stacked by the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court has never ever done anything and benefit black folk. Never. And they aren't going to do it. You've had the first 57 to 58 people appointed as justices to the United States Supreme Court were slave owners. And everything subsequent to the 1860s, they were either white racists or people who were totally indifferent to black folk. They're one of those two even to the present time. They're either racist, closet racist, or they're totally indifferent to black folk. They don't care about black folk. And what they've done is to make sure that the social construct, what was set up in the Constitution about your being property and 3/5 of a human being and non-competitive, will stay in existence. The guardians of racism in America is the United States Supreme Court. That's why when the second Constitution was written in the 1860s, and you had a few liberal whites, radical Republicans those days said, we got to correct some of these things that's going on. And they crafted the second Constitution. The second Constitution was made up of the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. And they also passed two civil rights laws, the 1865 and 1866 civil rights laws. They passed those laws all for black folk, newly freed slaves. They passed them for newly freed slaves. The Supreme Court jumped in immediately. And they used that same little schemes they use today. The first thing they did was said that all those civil rights laws that were passed from 1865 all the way up to the 1880, about 1889, all those civil rights laws were unconstitutional. Nobody gave them authority to do that. The United States Supreme Court does not have the authority to do what it's doing to you all right now. It doesn't even have the authority. But you don't see that black, you got all these blacks with law degrees. You see one raising hell about it? The United States Supreme Court does not have the authority to mess over you the way they're messing over you. That's why they've never done anything in your favor. They don't have that authority. Congress is the person that sets the rules and law. They are the elected bodies. Nobody elects anybody to the United States Supreme Court. They're the closest thing to royalty in this country, where they get a lifetime job to do nothing but sit there and mess with people based on their own personal prejudices and get away with it because nobody raises Cain about it. They don't have the authority. And so, but they didn't do anything after the Marlborough and Madison case back in 1803. Then here, jump up to 1857, and here comes a case called Dred Scott. In the Dred Scott case, a black man then was trying to get his freedom, having moved from Missouri to Illinois, and the Supreme Court, and went to the Supreme Court. And Justice Taney ruled in that, being the Chief Justice, says that in the final ruling in the Dred Scott decision in 1857, said a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. That case, that issue has never been overruled.
We must deal with these issues, and we must keep our eyes on the reality here that we've got to change the nature of the power relationship between us and Europeans. We've got to be bold enough to challenge the European and to defeat their power. There's no other way around it. In fact, not only must we challenge the Europeans, we must challenge the Asians, and we must challenge the Latin Americans as well. We must challenge any group. We must challenge any group that threatens to constrain our freedom and threatens to exploit us. And that does not include any other group. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that nations and people do not have permanent friends. They only have permanent interest. And the people who are your allies today can be your enemies tomorrow. And you must keep that in mind, because there's some of us who are deceived in this direction as well. I hear a lot of blacks use the word black and Latino constantly. We are related, yes, but there are also differences. And these differences can be exploited at different times. Some of you, if you looked at 13 last week or so when they were running a series of programs on the Spanish in America, you might have seen one particular program open up that says, we will no longer help the blacks in Los Angeles. We will no longer support the gringos and the Jews. We are now 40% of Los Angeles County, and we intend to control this city. We will no longer be told what slice of the pie that we will get. We will tell how the pie is to be divided. You must come to your realistic sense. Nations and people do not fall in love. They do not marry each other. Because see, we have some foolish people out here who look at their personal relations with white folk. And they have good white friends. And I'm not doubting the sincerity of the friendship. Not at all. Not at all. I do not doubt that blacks and whites can be truly friendly. And we should be friendly as people. And I don't see any problem with having those friends, you know. But do not confuse your personal relations with the relations between groups. Do not always assume that the dynamics that determines your personal relationships are the same dynamics that can be used between groups. That's a serious error that a lot of people make, you see. So they have a lot of personal friends who belong to other ethnic groups, and that's fine. So do I. But you can't confuse those. You know, you get some people who have good friends with Koreans, you know, they speak well while they're spending all their money there. And, you know, they can't understand why we would seek to struggle against these people for the ownership of our economic turf. Because for them, you know, we're friendly. What, you know, I just want to indicate to a degree that many of the issues that are here today have been around some time, but the media and others present these false images and they create terrific problems. This group, headed by single white women, of course, and moving into positions of power and influence. And of course, what I find very interesting, white women are not afraid, and the white feminists are not afraid to talk about power. We as African Americans seem to have a problem with talking about power. But these women will talk about empowerment just as they talk about anything else. And they are clear that they want real power in this society. I was reading a piece here the other day where you have now lending institutions that are designed to lend money to women going into business exclusively, not including men and other minorities. I'm saying that because, you see, one of the things that black folk are, we are over-inclusive. We want to bring everybody in on the party. And we've been made guilty when we don't bring everybody in. And here's a group that's founded, it's lending institutions and so forth, and their stated purpose is to lend to women, specifically to white females, exclusively, and support their economic growth and development. This group plans to be heard, and it's making itself heard and represents itself through shows like Murphy Brown. And now the American establishment is trying to come to terms with this group. And so in part what you see Quayle engaged in is a struggle even within the European American group. Of course, we know there's another program under there as well, though, about how shall the American family be represented, and can we now make room for the demographic changes in the white family itself, and how should that family be evaluated. You'll note one thing, you see, I tell people often, the changes in the black community are presage, or to a degree predict changes that will occur in the white community. What you see happening in the black community today will be happening to the white community tomorrow. The interesting thing about it is, though, since it happens to us first, we get all of the pejorative terms. You see, the language does not change, and we get all of the negative evaluations. But you note when the whites move into it to a measurable degree, all of a sudden it changes. And you begin to change the negative descriptions that blacks receive now to more positive and neutral descriptions. And so there's a struggle now going on, you see. How should we name these families? Can we accept them because our own daughters are creating these families and these children? How should we deal with them? And it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. You see, when you look at America, you got to look at it too as being ruled in part by a white male establishment, elite establishment, and of course by a ruling class And you have class struggles going on within that community, and of course the class struggles going on across racial groups as well. The Bill Cosby situation also, of course, represents demographic changes within the black community as well. The rise of the so-called black middle class, of a class of black people. A class now that's being represented by the likes of Henry Louis Gates of Harvard University, Cornell West, and some of the other rascals that are in the major colleges and universities across this country. Talking about media. Have you noticed the amount of media attention this gentleman is getting? How many people saw that article, that whole page in the New York Times? Yes, the graphics were interesting, with the African graphics running down the border of the page. Literally a whole page being given to this man, with the silhouette of the Star of David right in the center. Just the graphics alone indicate something there, ladies. You have to study all of these things. And the fact that the New York Times, which if you were to buy that as advertising space, I don't know, what is it now, about $15,000? Literally gave this page to Henry Louis Gates to talk about black anti-Semitism. But again, Gates is being presented across all the papers, the magazines, and so forth. And Gates reminds you of one of those Negroes, and he says it very clearly, that says, "I'm not like the rest of them." You know, those who used to be flattered when white folk would say, "If they were like you, we wouldn't mind." It's those others over there, So you think if you work hard enough to show them you're not like the rest of them over there, then you'll be accepted. And so you got a crowd now in this country that is trying to convince us very much that they're not like the rest of them. And Gates is saying, look, there is a black middle class culture, and you should pay attention to that culture. And this culture is very different from the black inner city culture. Why are you only presenting the Spike Lee movies that project, the inner city? And why are you not projecting the black middle class and showing that there's a culture that is distinct from the others? You see. So how do we represent the black middle class on TV? And how do we represent the fact then that there's a class division going on in America? And so what we have now in the inner cities are not poor black folk, but we call them the underclass. We don't even give them an ethnic designation, you see. They're just the underclass. So they're not related to their better off cousins in the suburbs. And so now we are getting this bourgeois class represented in the American press. And of course this bourgeois class often sporting neoconservative values and supporting the racial ethnic status quo, serving to maintain division within the black community. These families then, such as the Huxtables on TV, carry with them subtle ideological implications. Not only do we have then well-to-do blacks, which means that we are not really oppressing black people, but these blacks are where they are because of determination and persistence. And those who are poor then are lacking in basic characteristics. So the projection of the black middle class family on TV can be used very much to distort the reality of oppression and to distort the reality of the fact that we are a dominated people. I've warned you before that under imperialism at some point the imperialists elevate quite a percentage of their subordinate population. Because generally the imperialist population is much smaller than the peoples it rules over. And as it becomes more efficient, it recruits from the people it rules over certain of those people to help it in its ruling relationship. We call that neocolonialism. In America, we call that integration or affirmative action. The same thing, though. People still under the domination of whites. I don't care how much money you make. Still under control of whites. However, the movement of these people up means that they can join their masters in manipulating the behavior of the rest of us. They can be used as symbols by their masters that the society is fair, that it provides an even playing field for those in it, and that those then who do not make it merely are suffering from some kind of deficiency in their personality. And therefore, you will see TV then projecting both of these images in a way sometimes. The middle class image as well as the lower class image.